Hi, I'm John O'Grady from Rocket Whoosh Press, and I'm going to narrate this tour of Faraway Island, which is featured in the book Rocket McGee Avoiding Trouble by Roan Reedling, using excerpts from chapters 11 and 15, Faraway and Picnic. Just between you and me, these can be some of the drier passages in the book, but Chad insisted on taking the kids out for a tour and a picnic. Okay, let's get going then. Chad motioned for Amelia to proceed to the front passenger seat. Robbie and Brain moved back to the seats in the middle. Amelia paused at the door. He opened it, and she stepped in. He pushed the door softly and waited till it closed. He heard the latch hum to a tight seal. Then he jogged around the front and jumped over the driver's side door into his seat. Amelia, meet Andrew. Chad spread his arms to present the aircar's dashboard. Pleased to meet you, Amelia, said Andrew. Amelia smiled delightedly, but she clearly wasn't going to talk to the car. Andrew, asked Chad, do you have any standard itineraries for a get-acquainted tour of Faraway? I'm prepared to defer to your judgment about where we should go and what we should see. Andrew articulated some itineraries that he classified as his favorites, but Chad said, tell you what, Andrew, let's just start with a weather balloon's view of the island, say 9,000 meters straight up. And Andrew, I would like to make small adjustments to our position, altitude, and attitude here and there. 9,000 meters it is, sir, Andrew acknowledged, and I note, Carlos Sainz, that you are qualified in air car operation on Faraway. You may drive within my authorized parameters for a driver under 17 years of age. Thank you, Andrew. Buckle up, everyone. What, no force fields? Amelia kidded. Yes, force fields, replied Chad. Belts and suspenders. Just like Andrew's windshield. It's the Omicron way. Robbie rolled her eyes as she watched them get lost in each other's smiles. Pay attention to where you're going, she warned. Yes, Miss Robbie, replied Andrew. Robbie shook her head and rolled her eyes again. Then she turned to Brain, rolled her eyes up into her head, and pantomimed gagging herself. That ran into a drawn-out, choking death scene. Chad thanked Andrew when he announced that they were holding station at 9,000 meters. Chad slid the aircar laterally to the north, out over Faraway's north shore, then tipped them into a left bank to give the right side of the car some theater seating. They hovered in place like this as he pointed out the major features of the island. At first, Amelia was surprised that they could converse normally in an open-air car, but it quickly dawned on her. Those ubiquitous force fields. Chad was saying, Faraway is what they call a complex volcanic island. They call it complex because it has more than one feature. In this case, multiple overlapping calderas. Caldera is a name given to the bowl or crater of a volcano when it forms in a certain way, the way Faraway was formed. You know, one of the meanings of caldera in Spanish is cauldron, another meaning is boiler. So you can see how caldera is a pretty apt word for the crater of a volcano in any event. The most obvious features of Faraway are the inner and outer calderas. Those are the large horseshoe shapes you can see there. He traced them with his pointing finger. See? He shrugged. The outer horseshoe surrounds the inner horseshoe, of course, sort of an island surrounding an island. The reason they look like horseshoes instead of closed rings is because Omicron opened them up to let the Pacific Ocean in and create safe harbors for their ships. And because they're shaped like horseshoes now, the folks who live here use terms from what you might call the anatomy of a horseshoe to describe the islands and where things are on the islands. So bear with me and let's just all get on that same page term-wise, he recommended. It'll make it easier to understand what people mean when they talk about Faraway. You'll find it's really pretty easy because it just makes sense. And he began to describe the parts of a horseshoe. The round part of a horseshoe, the part that goes at the front of a horse's hoof, the toe of the hoof, is also called the toe. The parts of the horseshoe that extend back from the toe around the sides of the hoof are called the branches. And each branch of the horseshoe ends in what's called a heel, at the back of the horse's hoof, just as the back of a horse's hoof is called the heel. And of course, every horseshoe has an inner and an outer edge too, right? It's just like your foot too. Toe on one end, heel on the other, and in between you have the sides. "Thank you, Professor Chad," sang Robbie and Brain. Amelia eyed them as if to say, "Be kind now." Chad ignored them. Because the horseshoe shapes run east to west, each of them has a branch in the north and a branch in the south, a northern branch and a southern branch. You may hear the Faraway folks refer to the northern branch as the upper branch and the southern branch as the lower branch. I've even heard them called the top branch and the bottom branch. Like I said, Omicron carved those breaches into the calderas to let the Pacific Ocean in and let their ships in with it. Now Faraway can harbor seagoing vessels as large as the scholarships, which are as long as the longest supertanker ever built and 4 times as wide. Chad turned to his passengers. "You know, some people just call the inner and outer horseshoes the big shoe and the little shoe, and I can see why. Adding the horse part alone makes everything so much harder to say. The outer edge of the big shoe is completely surrounded by fairly steep cliffs of volcanic rock." He turned back to point out of the car. "Can you make out the sharp ridges marking the rim of the outer caldera? They run pretty much down the middle of the caldera's flanks, the branches. As steep as the outer cliffs are, though, the descent of the crater walls inside the big shoe is even steeper, but you can still carve out a pretty nice terrace on them. The toe of the big shoe, that wide and rolling but comparatively flat expanse of grassy hills at the western end of Faraway, that comes from a second coalesced volcano. A second major volcano that merged with the outer caldera. They've since filled in its crater with dirt and rubble from excavating the entrances to the inner and outer shoes and Faraway's subterranean facilities, too. Now the little shoe, that's where most of the long-term residents of Faraway live right now. The inner shoe is a secondary volcanic cone that rose from the basin of the outer caldera. It's almost completely insulated by the big shoe. You can see that its walls don't rise to the height of the outer horseshoe. They call the inner shoe's harbor, guess what? The inner harbor. My mother stays in a house down there. Sunlight seems to penetrate deep into both the inner and outer harbors, but it's especially noticeable in the inner harbor because it's so much shallower. It reminds me of the Bahamas. I've usually heard the whole expanse of seawater inside the outer shoe referred to as the Faraway Sea, including both the outer and inner harbors. I'm pretty sure that's actually the official name, but I've sometimes heard it called the Omicron Sea or the Sea of Omicron, too. Andrew flew the kids back east, low along the bottom branch of the big shoe so they could see the architecture on the southern banks of the Faraway Sea. As they approached the lower heel, they ascended to 5,000 meters and Chad took over to cant the ship so everyone could see what he was talking about. "See that cluster of 4 calderas rising at the tip of the lower heel?" he asked, pointing. "See the middle one with the giant white dome? That's where the command center is. The locals' nickname for that cone, that volcanic cone, is Mount Olympus." He shrugged and turned back towards his audience. "'Cause command and control, right? The dome itself is called the Tour." Olympus is the highest of those 4 volcanic cones. The one right below it is called the mezzanine. And see that smaller concentric volcano inside the mezzanine? People call that the small volcano. Go figure, huh? I figure we'll sit down there for dinner in the small volcano. He peeked at his OmniLink. "Soon. Don't worry, it's extinct. Or dormant, at least." He resumed, now pointing to the upper heel, though at 5,000 meters, pointing was sort of pointless. "There are 4 calderas on the upper heel, too. They don't look like what you'd expect, so they're hard to distinguish, because 2 of them are lakes. I mean, their craters are filled with fresh water from rain." They watched a supply ship enter the narrows between the upper and lower heels of the outer caldera. "That reminds me," said Chad. "The upper and lower heels and the narrows between them form what you might call the surface entrance to Faraway. So they call that complex the Cinean Gate, where the upper and lower heels would be the pair of clashing rocks that Jason and the Argonauts had to pass through to get to the Golden Fleece, you know?" I'll say that's the semi-official name for it anyway, just because names remain very much in flux around here, even after 20 years, as you might have gathered so far. And speaking of place names, most of the faraway locals call those small islands peppering the approach to the Cinean Gates, since they're at the entrance to Faraway, the Doorstep Islands. Hey, that was an abrupt end. But you can check out the rest of the story in Rocket McGee, Avoiding Trouble. It's available at the Amazon Kindle store.